Brooke, is this yours? Okay. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Adult Forum. Thanks for coming today. We've been waiting to share with you about our trip to Border Servant Corps in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and in El Paso, Texas. The group is here with me today, and I would like for maybe our group to introduce themselves by name. So if the group would come up and just say your name, they'll be intermittently coming up to share with me today. These are your Midvale members who were present with me, Pastor Katie, on the Border Servant Corps trip that we took in January of 2024 to the U.S. borderlands. So if you'd like to come up and introduce yourself at the mic, everybody can know the people who are on our trip together. Go ahead. Yep.
I'm Dennis Elwig. Oops, no mic.
Yep, it's on. Yep, it's on.
Oh, they heard.
Yep.
Steve Gill.
Melissa Belk.
Mark Thompson.
Nan Thompson.
Becky Evans.
Sue Cotton.
Karen Schultz.
Randy Schultz.
Tony Swandy.
Great, thank you, everyone. I'd like you to join me in a round of applause. It was a joy to be together, and the Holy Spirit really knit us together through this experience. And I'm grateful for the way that the Holy Spirit is working through us as a church to help us to go to have an eyewitness experience at the U.S. border, and then the privilege today of being here to share with all of you about what we saw and experienced. Really one of your primary news sources. So if you have questions about what is happening at the border, I hope that you remember these members of the body of Christ who can share, help, inform your experience as we seek to know the truth about what's happening at the U.S. border. I think today is a great day to present on a trip to the U.S. borderlands because we're celebrating St. Patrick today. St. Patrick, of course, if you've been to worship this morning, you know part of his story was St. Patrick was held in captivity in Ireland by Irish raiders. He learned to love his captors. He was coming back to, taken back to France, went to seminary, and asked the church at Rome if he might go back to teach and share the good news with Ireland. The Holy Church said no, that the island of Ireland is beyond the church, that the people are barbarians and they are not able to be civilized. Tells us something about God's view, and what we as the Christian church say is that no one and all people are worthy of God's love. So us being here to share about this trip, I think, is really a testament in the spirit of St. Patrick, in that everybody matters to God. So our trip begins with Border Servant Corps. We went January 18th to the 23rd. Just a little bit about this group, Border Servant Corps. They are connected with legal people coming to the U.S. who are refugees and asylum seekers. In 1997, Dot Quintance, she is a member of Peace Lutheran Church in Las Cruces, New Mexico, an ELCA congregation. She wanted to start a ministry for people coming across the border. Since she started it, the BSC community has served the border region of southern New Mexico, El Paso, and Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico, which is the city just over the border in Mexico. Together, they do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly in the U.S.-Mexican border by, one, hosting groups interested in accompaniment-style immersion, where relationships and firsthand education experiences of the border issues are prioritized. They create opportunities for community members to immerse themselves in education and service at the borderlands and to accompany our siblings on the US-Mexican border. I think it's important for everybody to know that the special part about Border Servant Corps is it started in a church basement in Las Cruces, New Mexico. All right, we read a book before we went, and the book is this one. It was written by a Lutheran pastor, Stephen Bauman. He's had some positions in the ELCA, but we read this together as a group in the fall before we took our trip, which helped us to connect what our theology is as Lutherans, how we read the scriptures, and how it connects to the idea of welcoming the stranger and the foreigner. So from a faith perspective, but also the book touches on the history. Our history as Lutherans, especially intensified in the events of World War II, when there were refugees needing to come over from Germany, many of whom were our direct relatives. And we started this business of welcoming the stranger, making homes for refugees and asylum seekers here in the United States. Let's see, moving on to show you where we stayed. We stayed in a comfortable home in Las Cruces, New Mexico. It's called Janan's house. It's located, if you want to look on Google Maps, probably a mile from New Mexico State University, if you want to look at that. So when we were looking to exercise, we would buzz over to New Mexico State University and take a walk. The first day when we woke up, we arrived, we went over to the federal courthouse, the Las Cruces Federal Courthouse. We needed to rid ourselves of any technological devices. We had our IDs, we were checked through and had the privilege of being in the courthouse for the morning. And I would like to invite Denny Hellwig up now to share his insights on the theme for the Friday, which was immigration in the criminal court system. Denny, would you like to share? How about that?
So the criminal courthouse was an interesting first day for us. It was quite an introduction. We were all expecting perhaps to see the workings of an immigration court. And we were disappointed maybe a little bit to find out that we're actually going to see criminal court. Immigration court is where asylum seekers go, and they will present themselves and do a credible fear interview, which means that they have to tell their story about why they feel that they need asylum in the United States. And most of the people that come across at the border points are asylum seekers and are seeking that refuge. The criminal court was quite different. These people are treated much different. They are people that have been arrested either by ICE or Border Patrol or what have you, and are caught illegally entering the United States or illegally being in the United States. Unlike immigration court, they are represented in immigration court. They are unrepresented and have to find their own people. But public defenders are with these people as they enter pleas. And what we saw was pleas to a magistrate. We were somewhat surprised to see that they all were taken up in groups, and were all sort of judged accordingly on down the line, and we were a little perplexed as to how that process comes about. And here, and they were fairly roughly treated. They were in in handcuffs, leg irons, waist chains as they went up. They were presented to the magistrate, and a little bit of their story was said by the public defender, and the magistrate went down to each individual and asking them if they pled guilty, and they did, and then they were sentenced either to a short prison sentence or something as we went along. As the groups went up, the prison sentences got a little bit longer and more involved. And finally, to the end, there was a group that came up, and these were people that were transporting. And they were bound over for a real trial and or to a judge, a higher level judge. So then we were allowed to talk to a public defender. And the public defender explained to us that these people are judged sort of on she put up a chart. And if you started up on the upper left and didn't have any charges or didn't have a lot of reentry and stuff like that, your sentence was diminished a little bit. And then if you had more and more reentries, you went to the right and down the chart to a heavier sentence. The reason why these people all pled was because the agreement was that if they would plead, they would get a reduction in their sentence up to or over to, and less. It was more of an expedient way to handle their judgment. So that was what we saw on that day. We were surprised going up the steps. There was this pillar or obelisk that was on the stairway, and they didn't allow us to take pictures. But we were all wondering what they were about. But this is an obelisk that has been set out for years, many centuries. That was actually the U.S.-Mexican border. And we did have an opportunity later to go to a park that was a disputed territory when the Rio Grande changed its course. And the United States and Mexico had a little tiff about who owned what territory, since the Rio Grande was supposed to be the dividing factor, and it had changed its course. So I think we won a little bit of land with that. But anyway, that was the interesting part of that. And just to echo, migration has happened all through the centuries, and so on and so forth. People have moved for various reasons. And today with the Irish, we're celebrating the Irish, and they came over to the United States for various reasons. So we should all think about our own immigration story and what it's like. Even those that were natives in the United States were forced to move for duress. And this happens, and it's what we do about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Denny. Yep, and Denny has sent us, there's a handout on the back table for you, and that is the glossary of key immigration terms. While we were having this trip, there were a lot of terms being batted around back and forth, and to help us catch up, Denny requested a glossary of terms for us, which really helps. So you can take this with you, and I think it's a great education in itself, the glossary, because it helps you to understand when someone says they were taken to the CBP. Do you know what that is? It's the Customs Border Patrol protection. If someone was coming into the US through the POE, it's the port of entry. So all these terms are there for you in the back. So that was our first day. We focused in the morning on the criminal court system. This was our lunch at downtown Las Cruces. And would anybody like to mention what we had for lunch that day? Anybody want to share the delicious food that we tasted? Oh yeah, good. Anybody want to share something they had for lunch that day? the flavors.
Tacos.
Tacos. We were so lucky. We could have a lot of wonderful food. Yeah. Yeah.
I had a burrito, but I can't remember the name of that specialty drink they were making.
Aqua fresca.
Yeah, aqua fresca. That was
Yeah.
the thing. And people you see them walking all around town with them.
Yeah.
That it was a very refreshing drink. Now, the weather was 50 or maybe in the 60s that day. So it was a break from winter here, although obviously we didn't have a bad winter. But
Yeah.
it was kind of fun to walk around and have a cold drink in your hand, just like it was summer.
Yeah. Okay, hold that thought. Let's go to the next slide. Steve, would you come forward? Our next stop was, I think that afternoon, it was Border Servant Corps Hospitality Center.
Yeah, so this good. This was at a shelter set up at a gymnasium, and we served dinner, and they had cots set up for families that they could stay the night, 2 or 3 nights. I don't know if you could see the picture very good, but in the back corner, there was a table set up that had a cross on it. And in back of there was some artwork done by the kids. And this one says, Gracias Dios por todo. So thanks be to God for everything. And I think this is just a reminder that out of all the things we saw, out of all the experiences we heard, that here's a child thanking God for what they do have. And at best, it's probably very stressful. At worst, very traumatic, very lengthy. And so it's just a reminder for us to always give thanks and to remember what we're called to do.
Thank you. And Steve, if you stay at the mic for one moment, and I could say is, when we were at Border Servant Corps Hospitality Center, what kind of people were there with us? How would you characterize the population in terms of age or demographics?
Yeah, younger. And I think when we first arrived, we served dinner, and then we were able to sit and talk with some of the families. And there was a group of, I think, 5 or 6 women from Venezuela. And we asked the pastor if we could pray with them. And a couple of them really broke down and said that their husbands were detained and they had no idea, what was happening. So this was going on for weeks. And there was some families with young children. There was, who did
I
Christina?
think now we're jumping ahead. We're talking about our serving the meal on Sunday night. And this, I thought, was at the hospitality center. So this was, you're saying, at the other spot. So I'm going to invite you back up to share more about that too. Because to be honest, the populations at both the hospitality center and the shelter where we served the meal were very similar. They were young, they were families, there was joy, there was trauma over the difficulty of the journey, over the poverty that has brought people here to take these risks. And there were a lot of children at the hospitality center. I'm going to move to the next slide, which was something that Denny Helwig has talked about our meeting with the public defender. And every day we had a couple of questions that were a part of our experience. And the questions were something like what we're seeing here. So the first day was, the theme was immigration in the criminal courts, and our reflection questions were, how do U.S. immigration policies determine people's options? And 2 was, how does this shape the choices that they make? So that is a part of what we did as well, is to reflect on this experience. Moving now to the walk that we had that night in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Raise your hand if you think this is a beautiful sunset. Yeah, it really was. We took a walk to NMSU together, some of us, and there was a lot of beauty in the borderlands. And so as you're looking at that, I have a very short Bible study for us, and it's printed on the yellow page in the back. But part of what we do is think about how our experience connects to our life of faith. And for you today, but throughout our week, we had biblical references to scripture and reflection questions to help us connect with this. So today for you, I hope you'll take this yellow sheet home with you and read through the Bible sources that I've listed for you. And I've titled this page, Welcoming the Stranger, Authoritative Biblical Sources. I've also got them listed on this sheet here, but I just wanted to read them through for you because they really shape our understanding as people of faith. The first, of course, is the parable of the Good Samaritan. This is a very instructive, authoritative biblical source for us in our life of faith. And you know, as the LCA Lutherans, we believe that the scriptures are the source and norm for our life of faith. That's a direct quote from what we believe. So here is the story of the Good Samaritan. You all know this story very well. I encourage you to read it at home. But we know that the Samaritan is being lifted up in the story. The Samaritan would have been an outsider to the religious community of that time. It's intriguing that Jesus told a story that lifts up the outsider as the one who shows God's compassion in our world. The other piece to the story is that the two religious people walked across the street to get away. The religion and the law walked away from the person needing God's compassion. But it is the outsider who shows it. This is an authoritative source for us in what it means to follow Jesus. Jesus is telling us the story. Then it says that this Samaritan was moved by compassion. If you look at verse 33, one of my favorite Greek verbs, explazomai, from which we take the English word spleen, meaning that the Samaritan outspleened upon this man, the spleen where the location of emotions was for people at that time. We talk about the heart. As Western people in the Hebrew culture, it was in the belly. So he outspleened for this man to show compassion. And then after he had bound him up and taken that time out of his day or his schedule or whatever he was set to do, he took him to the inn and gave the innkeeper permission, carte blanche with his finances, to take care of this man. So he's giving him health care, whatever it takes to bring him back to life. Then you see here in answer to the question, the last one is, Jesus says, which of these three was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the man replies, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, what? Go and do likewise. Authoritative scripture for us. Let's move now to Hebrews 13. Here it says, let mutual affection continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for some, by doing, have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison as though you were in prison with them, those who are being tortured as though you were being tortured yourself. Let's move now to the Old Testament. Let's go to Leviticus. Leviticus writes, these are the codal laws for the people of God. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the native born among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. There's that reference to the very first commandment. Let's follow the first commandment. And then finally, Romans 15:7, which is the gospel is for Jews and Gentiles alike, saying, welcome, Paul writes, welcome one another, therefore, just as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God. So just a brief location for us in the scriptures of welcoming the stranger in this concept. Let's move now to this next day in our trip, which is, the theme was joy in the borderlands. So, you know, we woke up to this brilliant blue day, and guess what we did? We went to the Las Cruces farmers market. Can you imagine what that was like? On behalf of Nan Faith, who was with us, Nan met this woman. She was making baskets. Guess what those baskets are made of? Would someone from our group like to share? Tony, would you share in the microphone what the baskets were made of?
They were made of lariats.
Lariats, or in other words, lassos.
Lassos, yeah.
Yeah. And so people are creating out of their community, which I think is so emblematic of the American West. and the creativity that happens in the American West, which has always been an emblem for us of progress in the United States. I mean, you think about the Hoover Dam, all of these things that at some point in US history were considered to be boondoggles or risks that ended up giving us what we needed in terms of the munition to be able to support the victory of World War II. That's your Hoover Dam. That's who we are as Americans. I think that it really came through in the borderlands at the Las Cruces market. You also see this gorgeous, colorful yarn that had been created. And Nan Faith made a connection, and Nan got one of these baskets. So if you ever want to see them, Nan, we know you're watching on Zoom today. You're invited. Bring one to church. That afternoon, then, we headed to Border Servant Corps Port of Entry, El Paso. So Border Servant Corps has rapidly expanded. In 1997, they had, 7 people working at Border Servant Corps, and now today it's over 200 because of what's happening at the borderlands. So they've got not only the receiving area, the hospitality center that takes people after they've been legally processed for a couple of days through the what we can call the holding facilities, then they go to where they were received at the Border Servant Corps Hospitality Center. But here is the other place where they can come over the border as asylum seekers, refugees, migrants, and go to the new port of entry, which is right at the border. So I invite anybody from our group who may want to say something about the port of entry, but this is new. This is just a month old because of the need for expansion. So here's where people come to figure out where they're going next. That contact, that job you have, for example, to put up drywall in Tennessee, that boss who's waiting for you in Tennessee, you got to find a way to get there by bus or by flight. So that's kind of where this transaction is going to happen. Go ahead. Go to the mic.
Yeah, and this was all volunteer. Obviously, people that are coming across can't speak English, so they help them on the computers to arrange their flights, arrange all their schedules. And we did find out that at that time, when they come through the port of entry, they're given work permits. Yeah. So that's key, so that when they get to where they're going, they can find work and support themselves.
Right here is a picture. Thank you, Denny.
Yep.
So it's that job, it's that contact that you have that's going to help you settle here, that they're working with. You'll see that this is the greeting when people come in. We are here to provide hospitality service to migrants entering through the port of entry. If you'd like further information, please contact the team on this card. I do want to go back to the 2 gentlemen who were with us that day, both moved by compassion, coming out of his experience growing up in his church, called to serve, being a person who grew up in El Paso, I think he was, and then another person, both of whom, this gentleman is having his college degree, and this is how he is living out his vocation, and then both incredibly competent, bilingual, top leaders for this process. And then you can see us in that picture having our visit. So let's see. Also, there's a picture of me with our host, and then also the director of Border Servant Corps. That afternoon, we were able to have lunch, and I'll invite Mark Thompson to share where we went for lunch, but also this park that we were able to be having an experience at.
Yeah, so we ate lunch out of doors. It was a box lunch that was provided at the Chamizal National Memorial. It's run by the National Park Service. And we were warned that if you walk in and you get close to one of the people that work there for the National Park Service, they will talk your ear off. And that was a truth statement. They did. But the interesting point of the memorial was there was the border between the U.S. and Mexico in the El Paso area was always the Rio Grande River going back to the mid-19th century. And at various times, the border would shift because you'd have a year where there were heavier rains up north. The Rio Grande would flood, its banks would run over, And as it receded, the new path would put land that had been north of the border, south of the border, or vice versa. So eventually in the 1960s, in 1963, actually it just happened prior to the assassination of President Kennedy, he sat down with the president of Mexico, and they actually figured out a plan that was consummated the following year by his successor, Johnson, to create kind of a concrete canal to kind of contain the river, so that when there were years when the river was high, it would all come back to that one spot. And so everything north of it would be US, everything south of it would be Mexico. And this was on that land to kind of commemorate, you see images of shaking hands and so forth. I found it a bit ironic that, this was here, even as we were there with all the turmoil that's happening with the border being, a place to stop things. The reason they had to do all this was people that lived there suddenly were not members living in their own country anymore. And so they had to figure out a way to deal with that, when the floods would come. It was a beautiful place, very quiet, but it was kind of interesting to look around and say, okay, the two countries have finally agreed on this, and now we just enforce the border instead of having it be, a place to pass through. So it was very, very interesting.
Yeah, we could really spend a lot of time with this example because it's about shifting borders. It's about leadership. It's about bearing conflict together and how we resolve it. And you can see in Presidents Kennedy and Johnson that they both came in, and that's what leaders do, is help to resolve conflict best they can. And that was great. And we also did, as you've said, encounter some very lonely U.S. Forest or Park Service employees. We really got a great education. It was super fun.
Apparently not a lot of people go there, so they really, and they were proud. There's a big mural on one window I took a picture of that commemorates, he says, when do you think the first Thanksgiving was in the United States? Well, Plymouth Rock, no. Actually, it was a celebration of Thanksgiving at that area. Had nothing to do with the people coming from Europe to Plymouth Rock or whatever, and the native Indians that were there. It was a celebration of thanking God for the bounty of life in this place, and that was commemorated there with a beautiful glass, artwork.
Yeah, I think that was intriguing. That was a real surprise for all of us to have the Park Service ranger tell us the first Thanksgiving was celebrated in El Paso, Texas, and have this counter narrative or perhaps parallel narrative for what it means to be an American and to give thanks is excellent. Thank you. Border Servant Corps sponsors, you can see what I wanted to lift it up is the ELCA is heavily involved, that our siblings in those regions of the United States are really working hard to care for people in this way, so that when you see Border Servant Corps, you see a lot of Lutherans supporting this effort because of our history and our faith. Okay, so today, again, remember, this is all the morning, this is lunch, and now, Joy in the Borderlands was our theme for the day. So what do you think of that picture of your friends? I love this picture. We had our mix of times of challenge and bearing sad stories and bearing trauma, but we also had a lot of joy. And isn't that what we do as people of faith, is we have a mix of both. So these are pictures from our trip to White Sands National Park, and we had sledding to do there. So if you go to White Sands and you're fortunate like we were, you get a few sleds. And can you just see how stunning New Mexico is at the White Sands National Park? The beauty, the natural beauty of New Mexico, just stunning. I think that it highlights how gorgeous it is at the border in this part of the United States that we share as Americans. There's your sliders. That was a really fun time for us and just a lovely setting. And I think these pictures of us are really fun to see. because we had a lot of fun. And finally, there's a lot of sand there, and we made such a mess of ourselves, just loaded with sand. So the questions for that day, Joy, the borderlands, were, what have you heard about the borderlands? And I think what I think this question is asking is, has it been all negative? Has it been all harsh? Is there no joy in the borderlands? And then who did you hear this from? Where are your sources for the truth? And then has this shaped what you expect to see, and how so? Those are the questions we asked ourselves. That Saturday, then we wake up Sunday, and now we're going to worship at an ELCA church in El Paso, Texas, Iglesia Luterano Cristo Rey. So this is Sunday, January 21st, and we had 2 items on our agenda, worship and serving a meal. At Sacred Heart Catholic Church later that day, the theme was Ministries a Welcome. Here we are at our worship service that morning, which is also the same room where we later having our potluck with the worship attendees. Then we were able to, following worship, prepare the meal for the Catholic Church that we took it to that evening in El Paso. And would anybody like to say anything about the meal that we prepared, but also then shared that evening? Did you enjoy that meal? Does somebody have the mic? Could you pass it to somebody who wants to say what that flavor, what you thought of that meal?
The meal was an opportunity because we not just only had made the food and served it, but we sat and joined people to listen to their stories. Now, some of us have a little more, hablo un poco de español. Many of our speakers were Spanish speakers, not all of them. And I think it was very, what it was a reminder to me is our common humanity. It did not matter where I was born or where they were born. It was that we were all human beings together with the same loves and fears. I happened to sit with 4 individuals from Venezuela who were trying to find out how they were going to get from where they were to where they had housing in Colorado. And so, and this right to work does not happen instantaneously, and it doesn't happen, so you can't just go, it's just challenging. So here they are, and they need to get from here to there, and that has to be figured out. And it was just such a reminder to me. I could have met these people in Madison, Wisconsin, and sat down and had a conversation with them. So, the children were adorable, I have to say. They were really cute.
Thank you, Sue.
Actually, I want to echo what Sue said. I sat at the same table with Sue, and there were 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman. This one man on the end, and these people are what, 20-ish, 22, 23, young people. And they are the outcasts. They're the people seeking help. And the way it worked was we served all of our guests, and then we went and sat down with them. And this one just looked at me, and he made me feel welcome. I mean, it was just weird. And I thought, I feel the Lord here, and I also feel like this person is going to be a real big success because their personality was such that they were going to be one that led the way for other people. Once he learned English, he was just going to be a dynamo in our country. I was just amazed by him.
Thank you, Mark. And Denny has another insight into I'm going to just skip over. We had a little trip, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Before you speak, Denny, because you and I were at the same table, are you going to say something about that?
Yeah, well, I wanted to say a little bit about the pastors. Here's
one of the pastors, Pastor Rosemary.
Yeah, Pastor Rosemary, had a unique story that was, she told us when she was growing up in Bolivia. And she told her mother she wanted to become a missionary, to become missionary to the United States, because the Anglo-Christians seemed not to really follow what was written in the Bible. So that was kind of interesting. We did feed, we plated, the meal was made, and the meal was plated, and in my notes I had that we served about 25 to 30 people. And then afterwards, There was about 45 plates left over, and we went outside and fed homeless that were outside the shelter. And then finally, we sat down ourselves and ate. And sat with a young lady, her name was Madeline. She had a typical story of being overcharged for her transportation, 3 times what normally a bus fare would be. And they would throw her out of the bus at the before they got into town, and she would have to walk in, and because they didn't want to be held for transporting. And then she met coyotes that were going to help her across the border. They robbed her of her money and physically abused her. She finally did get into the United States, had no money, and was unable to contact her friends and nowhere to go. And she was quite in despair. And the only thing we could tell her was that we would remember her and pray for her. And she seemed to brighten up a little bit with that. But that's all we could offer.
I'm glad you shared that story, Denny, because we trust in those prayers. And that was a really powerful moment when you cared for her at the table. It was as you say, despairing situation. And I think it was difficult for all of us to sleep that night. We'd had a really emotional meal and we needed a break. So when we got back to our place, we took a break and just had some private time to process, to rest, to heal from bearing one another's burdens. I was at Denny's table with Madeline, and I do have to say, as you wonder, why would Madeline make this dangerous journey where she was abused, she was traumatized, as I was sitting right next to her, she needs a lot of care. Go ahead, Denny.
The reason why she left was because at home
I'll repeat it.
She had to sleep underneath her bed because of the shots that were coming through her rooms at night.
Madeline was from, I'll repeat it, Denny, for the mic. She was from Honduras, and she had to sleep under her bed because of the violence that she was experiencing so that she wouldn't be shot because of the political unrest in Honduras. That's why she made the trip. When she was poorly treated, she got to the border from coming up through, from Honduras, through the jungles, through everywhere you think of. She got to the Mexican border, and as Denny said, you get to the bus stop and they say, that'll be 3 times the rate for Mexican nationals. And then she was treated in such a way. But what we knew why she was making the journey after sleeping under her bed, it was because her beautiful daughter, who was 6, was with her. And we were just captivated by how Madeline had protected her daughter and was seeking to do that here so that she would not grow up with the trauma that Madeline had been through herself. Quick trip in between. I will say something since we're at Sacred Heart right in El Paso. Here we are. And, we had our heavy times, we had our joyful times, and we always like to have fun with the camera. So I was sending some pictures back, and Blake said, hey, you guys are always like doing this, and you're always like jumping. And so this was after we served at Sacred Heart. We just jumped up and down. But my Christina Rohr was on the trip with us, and she looked at that picture and she told me, Mom, after we served that meal, she had sat with a woman who was had come up through the Darien Gap and had a conversation with her. She was too traumatized. Christina said, I couldn't even lift my arms for that picture. It was too heavy. So moving on, back. In between that service, so we went to worship, we prepped the meal, then we took a quick trip to the El Paso International Airport to meet Border Servant Corps at the airport. So when you've gotten your plane ticket, or for example, those who do get a plane ticket or bus ticket, then you go to the airport and there is somebody there at the entry point who may help you with language. And you may be speaking Ukrainian, you may be speaking Russian, you may be speaking Spanish, you may be speaking Portuguese, you may be speaking French, coming from Haiti, as we encountered. So you need a little help at the airport because I speak English and I get confused at the airport. So the Border Servant Corps has people to help you at the airport get to your flight on time. So these were two of those gentlemen, and that was a really fun conversation. Oh, there we go. We serve bread. People really like just the plain bread. Pastor Rosemary and the caretakers. Monday we woke up and the theme was the long shadow of the border. And we went right to the border. And I think there was someone who was going to share. Yes, come on up, Becky, and share what it was like when we met with the U.S. Border Patrol.
Can I just use this one?
Sure. Two
Does this
guards.
work?
Yes, hold it close to your mouth.
Okay. Oh, that'll be better. Okay. But this was, so we went to the border and you can see maybe I should stand over here so I'm not standing right in front of where you can see the wall. We were right at the wall and there it's, I was just, that's 18 feet high and that's one of the shorter parts of it. I guess some places it's 30 feet high. And then the border agents that met with us were both female, which surprised me. I expected to meet with sort of two macho guys, and so I was surprised that they were female agents. But what? Oh, okay.
Hold it really close, I think.
Okay. And and I was also surprised that they patrol by themselves. If they have trouble, they can call for backup, but they do go out by themselves. And then one of the women was talking about the unaccompanied minors that she has picked up, and I asked her how young the youngest one was, and she said 3 years old. So that just shows how desperate people are. They'll just tape a name and a phone number to their sleeve and hope that somebody gets them to where they're going. So that just shows another way to show how desperate they are to get a better life for their children.
Reminds me of another Bible story, a baby in a basket.
Right.
Desperate things.
Yeah.
Becky, thank you for those insights. Here's a picture looking in, that's through the border wall. You can see that metal. And then that's looking into Ciudad Juarez, named after the president who worked with Johnson and Kennedy to establish a more direct border for us. So that's Ciudad Juarez, which means the city of Juarez in Mexican. Yeah. Where is it? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. That's the Rio Grande. Yeah, isn't that surprising, Tony? I like that. Yeah. That's the concrete thing that was built by the U.S. government to try to establish some boundaries. Okay. Tony, I invite you forward now to share about where we went that afternoon, which was to Annunciation House. If you Google search Annunciation House and Ruben Garcia this afternoon, you can read more about their work.
You have to put this way down now here. Okay. Annunciation House. No, it's okay. Isn't it okay? Yeah. Annunciation House was founded in 1978 by an incredible man named Ruben Garcia as a Catholic Immigration Welcome Center. And Annunciation House does the same kind of work, maybe multiplied forward, as Border Servant Corps does. They have built relationships with Border Patrol, the ICE, the incoming ports of entry, the airport and everything. And they have facilitated people coming across the border, helping them get where they want to go, figuring out what they wanted to do now that they've made this harrowing journey. And Ruben Garcia is the guy in charge of it. And he's been doing this since 1978. We got to talk to him for what, hour and a half or so? All of the time he was on, he would say, excuse me, his phone would ring, and he would be talking to ICE saying, okay, you're releasing 100? Okay, send 70 of them to Las Cruces Border Servant Corps. Send 20 of them to Holy Name. Send these ones here. Bring them here. What time will they be here? Okay, we'll be ready for them. And he was doing this the whole time he was telling his story. He was just the most powerful speaker on behalf of immigrants, and the local people call him the godfather of immigration. And it was true. He was something. And one of the things he said is, if you want to speak about immigration, tell people you are an advocate for the right of asylum. Tell them that everybody has the right to legal representation and a fair trial. Tell them you believe that. And then he said, Mark Thompson asked him, what do I do when I go home and I talk to my relatives who think, oh, those terrible immigrants, and that they listen to the radio and TV that maybe some of us don't always listen to, and they believe quite differently than we do about immigration. What do I say? And he kind of went into, he said, make sure you know how to speak credibly about the border situation in immigration. And I think, Danny, you put some of his resources on the sheets back there, right? He gave us a list of credible news agencies to talk about what was happening with immigration, and they're back there. And one of the most interesting one was the Cato Institute, which is a really conservative institute, but he said they have excellent information about what's happening at the border. Then he introduced us to Wilson, and that was maybe the most heartbreaking story for me of the whole trip. Wilson came in. He was a young man, like 20 or so. He was from Honduras. He had been detained in Ciudad Juarez in a detention center where they had one side was for men and one side was for women and children. And there was a fire at that detention center. And at night, they'd lock the doors of the detention center. And the fire, when the fire broke out, everybody was screaming to get out, and they unlocked the women and children's side, but not the men's side. And 40 some of the occupants died in the fire, and he hid in a corner and was badly burned. He has anoxic brain damage from the smoke inhalation. He was able to learn to walk again with this, but his legs are badly crippled, and he could barely speak, but Reuben could understand him. So Reuben would translate what he was saying to us. It was the most disturbing, moving thing I think I might have ever seen. And he asked for help. He said, come and volunteer. We don't want you to come for a day. We want you to come for like 3 weeks or a year and help us serve these people. He asked us, he said, you need money. Like Wilson's therapy every day cost them $120. So they had to do that. It was really amazing. And then I remembered a thing people talk about illegals. And what about the illegals? And I remembered then from the book that we read ahead of time, the question should never be, are they legal? The question should always be, are they our neighbor? Our neighbor.
And Tony, I do want to say something about the fire that happened, is that for the men, they said, we'll let you out if you pay us.
Yeah.
So when you think about, if you think that evil isn't real, it's not only located in that community. We know it's located everywhere. But that's tough because, tell me his name again. Wilson. Wilson had come, his family had gotten things together so he could come get a job, work, and help them
money back.
stay alive.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. And then if you'd like to look at those credible news sources, they're printed for you on the back table. And and remember that these are both, anyway, and then also there are ways that you can volunteer locally printed on the sheet as well.
Katie,
I'd like to, yep.
I'm going to interrupt here only because this was very moving for me because it was the first realization I had of how short-sighted I am. U.S. policies have a ripple effect, and the reason Wilson was in detention in Mexico is because we had a go back and wait in Mexico. And in Juarez, it's a tough thing for the city because now the U.S. is sending everybody back. And so the Juarez residents complain to the police, and the police just do a roundup. If you don't have a stable home, you're getting put in detention, not because you did anything wrong, but because you're in a place they don't want you to be. But it reminds me, and we think about our politics, we have to think not short term, but we have to think of the ripples. So our policy of sending people back to Mexico directly resulted in that loss of life.
Thank you, Sue. That's a really important point. And this happened when Title 42 was in effect. I also think it's important for everybody here to know that when we talk about ripple effects, as the ELCA, we are a both-and church. So we're always working to support economies in nations in, for example, South America or Slovakia or Ukraine, so that people can live where they are and they don't have to immigrate. But we know that for a variety of reasons, people do need to immigrate. So the ELCA is really, we've got a broad range of ways that we're following Jesus and serving the world, one of which is, of course, with our voting and politics and policies here as United States citizens. But secondly, as an ELCA member, did you know today that you're supporting women-owned businesses in South America and Africa so that people don't have to go through this? Keep that in mind. I also want to say one thing is, while we were watching Ruben Garcia speak, in the stained glass windows of the place where he was speaking to us, here's the family that we're looking at the whole time. Our favorite refugee family, Jesus Christ, our Lord, Mary, and Joseph. And also the name Annunciation House is, when we remember that Bible story, what does Mary say? Servant of the Lord. And secondly, you have brought good news to the poor. Good news for the poor. That is Annunciation House and what it's named after. Moving to Cafe Mayapan in El Paso, we had a delicious lunch. You can see that our hands again are raised and we're having fun. And then we did go to conclude our journey at the Madison International Airport. And I took this photo of the people sitting across who would be on our flight. They were headed from El Salvador, not sure where that couple was from, as asylum seekers. They're wearing the sweatsuits that you receive at the hospitality center. They're wearing this group isn't, but comfortable shoes that people are given, for example, Crocs, when they arrive, because often their shoes are really worn out and so are their clothing. But that is who you may see in the airport. We talked to them, some of us did. And then, anyway, those are Tony's feet. Sometimes you may be wondering how to help. And you heard, as you heard today, that you already are. That through the leadership of the Immigration Action Team here at Midvale, that a family, an asylum-seeking family here legally in the United States was welcomed on Tuesday into the Wakefield property. When you look at the house and you say a prayer for that family, you know that we're already working on it, thanks to the leadership of the Immigration Action Team. Here are ways that you can help. We have the Asylum Seeker Wakefield Project in the drop-down screen for the Give Now button on Midvale Community Lutheran Church. One of our members, Steve Gill, Melissa Belk, are regularly over at the Goodman Center, and they have let us know that many of the people they're serving at the food pantry are people who are asylum seekers, refugees, migrants. And what they're looking for, what the item we chose to propose to you is the rice. They're really needing rice, among other things right now. So if you want to do that, Steve's going to have a bin out there by our regular food pantry for St. Mark's. But if you want to bring a bag of rice when you're at the grocery store, you think of it, pop it in out there. Those are ways that you can help. And then I am thinking about doing the trip again next January. So if you're interested in going with me, I've put a sign-up sheet for interest in the back. Think about it. Are there any questions? We're at time. It's 10:15. Denny, do you have one more thing? Yep.
So it's you need to stay on top of things, but it gets confusing about what to do, and that was one of the concerns I had. What can help? And I found this quote in the publication The Hill by Raphael Banal, and he's quoting Andrew Bates, a White House spokesperson, and the quote goes as follows: "Policymakers should instead focus on managing migration humanely and efficiently in order to align our immigration system with our humanitarian values and economic needs. Meaningful solutions to this challenge lie in stronger federal coordination, expedited access to work permits, and robust investments in processing capacity, immigration courts, and community-based programs." So I thought that was sort of what we could support in terms of making it better for immigration. We were all challenged to come up with a 2-minute elevator presentation, and I've tried to sharpen mine as we go along, and I basically found that really the chaos that you hear about the border, it really is very well organized by the Border Servant Corps, and the people that are coming in are not druggies. They're not mental institution and jail people that they've let out. These are families, young families that are seeking to better themselves and their family.
Thank you, Denny. Nancy has a question, and we're at time. It's 10:18, but that's okay. Sorry, David.
Since this is your second trip, did you notice any obvious differences in the border between the two trips?
Well, I will say that it is dynamic, David. It is a dynamic place. So as I went in January 2023, things were at a heightened pace then, at a heightened focus in the news here in the Western American media. And then things got quiet again over the summer. I think things do get quiet at the border in the summer. It's just too hot. It's just oppressively, hot. So of course, by geographical reasons, people are going to think about it more in the fall, over the winter, so they can survive the possibility of making it to the United States. So I think that has something to do with it. The weather, I think the leadership of the United States and the perception abroad about the openness and the possibility of having work here and a safe place for your family being able to come in. Number two, but the same kind of numbers they said were kind of racing up during November and December happened this year. I thought it was interesting that it was again in the news when our group went, and now it's kind of moved a little bit more to the back. But this being 2024, we'll be hearing about it more if people choose to focus on this as the most important issue. I think that's why what we're talking about today as people of faith and hearing the truth and knowing these credible news sources are so helpful to us as we seek to be, in the words of Martin Luther, faithful citizens and caring, as Martin Luther said along in his interpretation of Jesus Christ, is just for the common good. Other questions?
Yes, just a very brief one. Annunciation House, is that the one that when Mary Farmer was pastor at St. Mark's, she went down there
Yeah,
and
that's
we
the one.
also helped with supplies? Am I remembering
Probably
correctly?
right, yeah.
Thank you.
Another question, Tyrone?
Just a quick observation. When Janet and I lived in Texas before coming to Madison, this is 77 through 79, in the Texas news, it just shows how borders shut out news. The situation or the matter of immigration at the border was big news. And I believe El Paso was one of the places where social services and the school districts were being overwhelmed by people coming over the border. So, and apparently this has been going on for a long time. When we came to Madison, we never heard anything about it until recently. So my observation is that as a country, most of us are very late to come to the realization and to emotionally and intellectually taking into this, but the situation is far ahead of us, far ahead of where we are as people. So we have a lot of catching up to do.
Well said, Tyrone, especially on St. Patrick's Day. When we think about the immigration history of the United States, 1850s, that's when my people came over, the Norwegians, but also so much of Ireland did because of the famine, because there was nothing there for them. Now, the border has shifted, right? In terms of who is the immigrant. And, you know, from the 1970s in Texas up till now, it's time that we understood and put our minds around it. And that's why I say thank you to all of you for coming today. Thanks for being in on it.